My name's Fred. I'm an alcoholic. Grateful to be sober today, one day at a time, and thank you all for taking your time to spend with a poor drunk like me. There's only two alcoholics, a male and female. They don't care if you come from Yale or jail, park place or a park bench. It doesn't discriminate. I like to tell this one particular story in the beginning of my thing is because it's the first thing that I still remember. My sobriety date is January 1st, 1980. By the grace of God and Alcoholics Anonymous, one day at a time, sponsor. I've had 2 home groups in 45 years and 3 sponsors, and all of them said, don't drink and don't die. That's the bottom line of this whole thing. So I'm from New England, as you can tell, another guy that's come down here to follow his children and grandkids. But when I first got here, the guy standing up here with a shirt and tie told the story. So I hope you can identify and not compare with this. And if you've heard me speak before, it's okay. You can fall asleep. This is a good place to have a cup of coffee and fall asleep. I love speaker meetings. God gives you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason to do twice as much listening. I never listened to anything in my life. I happen to be Catholic, Irish, alcoholic. I know it all before I do it. You know how that goes? I see a lot of smiles out there. There was this particular guy named Bill, and he was having a hard time. He was really young, in his early 50s, and he was getting very forgetful. And they said, his friend said, look, he says, go to the hospital, get checked out. They give you new knees replacements, elbow surgeries. They give you a new brain, you remember everything. So he went into the hospital, interview for the doctor. The doctor shows him, he says, Bill, he says, listen, we got a few. He says, this is a brain of a surgery. He says, how much? He said, $100,000. So he takes him down the hall. He said, now this is a brain of a nuclear physicist. He said, how much? He said, $250,000. He said, my God, he says, you're charging a lot. So he takes him down the hallway and opens up the door. He said, now this is a brain of an alcoholic. So he said, how much? He said, $1 million. He said, how come you charge so much? He said, it's never been used. I see a lot of us can identify with that. I tell my story, physical, mental, spiritual, but I've fallen in love with the big book the last year or so. Even though we're coming out with 5 editions. I read them in the morning when I eat my breakfast, after I say my prayers, and I read a lot of the stories now. I understand them now more than I did the first 20 or 30 years. And as you'll see as I tell my story. But there's a lot of great stuff in here that, I think we're coming on the 5th edition. And this is a little sentence about he who loses his life. And it's I think in the 2nd or 3rd edition. I have 3 or 4 editions. And he's a writer, and he's talking about as the years go by, it's unbearable. The man with a grown-up brain and childless emotions, vanity, self-interest, false pride, and jealousy, and approval of few. He says, to my way of thinking, the definition of alcoholism is a state of being in which the emotions have failed to grow in a stature of the intellect. And I don't have to be a doctor of philosophy, as you'll figure out by the time 5 minutes, 10 minutes of my story, that how alcoholics, I don't know if any of you people knew Father Martin from Maryland, and he was a famous speaker, and he went and I only heard him a few times, but you hear people, you identify one thing with him, and he used to say, alcoholics have their intellect, their emotions over their intellect, and they react before they think, and this is what that is talking about. So I'll tell you a little bit about me. I don't talk a lot about my drinking career. I talk about to try to stay in the solution. I break my story up into physical, mental, and spiritual illness. And this, the spiritual thing is what we try to get back. And thank you for praying for me. Please, God, help me to say His words in your will this day. It's easy. Prayer is talking to God, and meditation is just listening. And so I told you in the beginning, rich or poor. I happen to be on the poor side of town. I was born in Connecticut. I was an orphan. And I was born with 2 different color eyes. I lived in 14 foster homes. I have a learning disability, ADD, PMS, CBS, AVC. I have a lot of dysfunctions. And back in those days, they never recognized these things. I don't make light out of it. It is what it is. And it was difficult. That's all it is. It's my story. I have to tell it. I don't want to try to hide it. I'm not a victim. I'm not, but back in those days, everything was thrown under the rug and not avoided, ignored, and stuff like this. So there are a few people that I like to mention in my story that happened, but it was hard. It was difficult. It was extremely difficult learning how to live life on life's terms without alcohol. I call that alcoholism, not wasm. I, self, and me. And I had this little mirror in here, and I had to figure it all out. And a lot of times I couldn't figure it out. So what happened to me, I went from foster home to foster homes and boys' school, Mount St. John's School boys. And in 1963, I ended up homeless. In 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated that year, and I spent almost a year doing like I'm doing right now, standing on a street corner like this, and I'd had nothing to do all day long. I used to all day just like that. I had a little room there, and I got meals at the corner. That's all I did for a year. And one day, a car went by, and I don't know who was in the car. I ended up in the back seat of a car. And you gentlemen know the same thing when you jump in the car and there's a bottle of booze going around. I just had a drink, all right? And I had a drink, and I went into, it was hard stuff. I don't know what it was. And I went into a blackout right there. And I hate to say this, but I ended up in the Connecticut River in a rowboat with one oar, all right? Now, I got to tell you, my grandkids, everybody knows there's two oars to a rowboat, but what I'm about to say to you, I think we all can identify with. I was screaming and yelling, God, get me out of this. I'll never do it again. You ever say that to yourself? I call that the Irish proverb. You could call it anybody's proverb. But that was what happened. God, get me out. I said that thousands of times when I was in trouble and all this other stuff. This mental illness that you play in your head and the pain that you ignore and evade. I can identify with alcoholics and prisoners, and people have a lot of people with sick, homeless, tough life. And that was my lot in life. So the first miracle that happened in my life was a priest. And not all priests are bad. There are some really wonderful priests. And the priest said to me, Fred, you want to get off the streets? And I said, yes. That's probably the most smartest thing I ever said that. And he took me back to the boys' school. And I was at the boys' school. I went back there. I was 17 years old. And I have to tell this incident. I told this the other day. And people, my friend really likes this. He retired from the Marine Corps. And he loves this story. He's not an alcoholic, but this is. I went back there. I was the oldest guy. I was the tough guy they all looked up to, okay? So I had to have that, the ego, the macho, all that stuff. So anyways, we didn't like this one guy. He was in charge of taking care of us and this and that. So the guys were saying to me, look, Fred, that guy's, I said, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. I says, I'll start it. You guys jump in, okay? Okay, you guys know. You know this story well, huh? So anyways, one day, coming down the hallway, he said to me, take that gum out of your mouth. I said, you make me. Well, I want to tell you, he hit me so hard. And that was like I went to the moon, and I'm down on the floor, crying my buns off, all right? And I'm looking back, and I could see all my friends were running out the door. Very good. I'm not an advocate for violence, but I can tell you right now, this guy learned a valuable lesson who his friends were. Okay, I did. Anyways, I'm very, very grateful to that boys' school. They saved my life. I would not be here today. I stayed there till I was 20 years old, and we all got drafted in the Vietnam War. All of us got drafted, and most of the boys went over to Vietnam, and most of the boys never came back. God watched us out for fools, drunks, and little kids. You understand that? And we're all little kids of God. We're fools sometimes and childless, grandiose. I ended up in an island called Guam. And in the Pacific Island, if you've never ever been there, don't go. It's horrible, nothing to do. And I started my last 6 months there. I spent 18 months over there. I ended up over there because my next of kin was a priest, Father McDonald. I didn't have parents. So I spent a year and a half over there. The last 6 months I started drinking. Now, every time I drank, I didn't get into trouble, but every time I was in trouble, I'd been drinking. You understand, identify with that thing? So it's not how much you drink, Jack Daniels, Boone's. I started with the whiskey and stuff, it started. But then I had to switch to, I started to Boone's Farm, apple wine. You ever drink that old melt strawberry? It's rot gut stuff. Oh, it's horrible. My old sponsor used to say this. He drank so much wine he had fruit flies. Okay? I quote some of these guys that were my teachers. Anyways, I started drinking, and I understand it tonight. I can explain it to you now. That I was an alcoholic waiting for a time pot. If you read all these stories and you go to a lot of meetings, the man takes the drink and the drink takes the man. And I've been here long enough to see so many young people and old people, even 65 years old, never just pick up a drink and become instant alcoholics. The phenomenon of craving hit them, and that was it. They were gone. So that's what happened to me. I started, and I'll be honest with you, I was terrified, bewildered. It was hard. I came back in 1968 from overseas. I spent over there. Robert Kennedy was killed that year. Martin Luther King was killed that year. And I was coming back to the United States. And I had no home, no job, no family, no house, no education, and no money. And it's a tough road to do. And I got rid of my army. The protesters are burning down the places. I got rid of my uniform less than 2 days, 48 hours, and I headed back to Connecticut. And this priest helped me stay here, there. I started bopping around, and that was in 1968 to 1968, 69. I started drinking a little bit more. I always hid my drinking. I'm a closet drinker. And of course, I'm self-centered and selfish. I'm not going to share it with anybody. More for me. But we don't know these things till afterwards. It's what you learn after you know it all. So, anyways, I started 68 to 69. I met a girl, and one of my 4 steps is women. I have a lot of trouble with women. Okay. Terror, a foster home, and met, we were like prisoners in some of them, 8, 10, 12 kids packed in a basement, and there was nothing down there. I can't tell you what it was. That part of my mind is blacked out. I'm going to start crying, but it is what it is. And so I met a girl. I had no experience. I'm 22 years old, getting out of the service. I didn't have much dating experience. I met this girl from Silver Springs, Maryland, Maureen, and she comes from a family of 8. And they're all educated. She is the middle child of 8 children, and she's the middle child of 3 girls. And I know that God must have, it says in this book, that God puts special people in our lives. And I know that she put them in my life. So anyway, she called her mother and father. We started dating, and they hated me, and I hated them. And she called her mother and father up, and she said that she was bringing an orphan home. Now, they thought it was a dog or a cat, or you know what, right? Anyways, I went to her family's home in Silver Springs, Maryland, and we had dinner in there. And this is the only thing that I had to offer her. And we had a nice dinner that day, and I got up and helped her mother pick up the dishes and wash dishes. Fred's been doing dishes for a long time, since I was 4 years old, and I'm a real old guy. I'm still doing dishes. But that's what I had to offer her. That's it, gentlemen, that's it. And so we started dating 1969, 70, and we lived together a little bit a year before, and drinking incidences started to happen. I blacked out driving a automobile on her Carmen Ghia 3 wheels one night and stuff like this, and we got into arguments and stuff like this. And if you read the doctor's opinion, I think it's Dr. Bob or Bob, I'm sure, I can't remember, and he talks about his, there used to be 20 questions in a lot of states. Do you drink alone? Do you hide your drinking? Does it affect your health? Well, as soon as I started drinking, I had terrible gastro bleeding ulcers. Dr. Bob had that same lot of stomach pains. And I was hospitalized 4 times actually. I was hospitalized 4 times in 69, 70, 71, all right? And 4 or 5 times she would give me milk, Maalox. I'd be drinking Boone's Farm wine and I'd get this and hospitalized. Anyways, we got married June of 72. A week before our wedding, I was in the hospital again. Okay, I was in the hospital again, and for the 3rd time. And the week after our wedding, I was back in the hospital. I had half my stomach taken out for bleeding ulcers, and they were perforated and stuff. So Maureen was the 2nd miracle. The 3rd miracle was 4 weeks later. A little Jewish man. I didn't have any skills. Okay, no teachers. So, anyways, I was taking some upholstery classes and stuff like this, and I ended up walking in a upholstery shop in New London, Connecticut. A little Jewish man from Russia came. I was buying some supplies, and so he said to me, "Can you upholster like that?" And I said, "No." Remember the answers? Yes, no, and wait. Those are the answers that you get here. And so he took me under his wing. I bought his little upholstery shop for $10,000. Now he was going to work for me under the table for $10 an hour and this and that. And I hate to say, this is what happened. He wasn't even on the job in 10 minutes, and he found out I couldn't cut, I couldn't sew, I couldn't do anything. I didn't have any skills. But this kind man I talk about, Sam Seltzer, was because he reminds me of all the old-timers in AA, men and women in AA who have helped me with my life. And so he stayed with me for 8 years, from 72 to 80, all right? And so I started my drinking in my upholstery shop downstairs, and customers and this and that, and coming home and stuff like that. And, Prosper, we, started doing a little good. My wife had a career, dental hygiene, and so I would always drink a 6-pack, switch liquor stores, and I'd come home, and then she'd go out. So we bought a little house. We bought a little house. I told you, in Old Lyme, Connecticut, for I think it was $26,000. All right. Now, I would start these projects. There's something about us alcoholics. We're not quitters. So I think that's why you're not here tonight. She wanted 8 shrubs put in front of the house, about this big here, all right? Now I ended up, I was just drinking a little bit of beer, and I ended up digging a trench about 24 feet, the width of the house, 3 feet deep, 3 feet wide. People, this was about 3 months later, I'm still digging. And my people would go by and say, "Is the water main broken here or something? What's going on?" I said, No, I'm going to put the shrub in. Oh my God! I thought I was Joseph the carpenter. Okay, and my skills. And I already told you my skills, right? She got pregnant. I don't know how that happened. That was an accident. And so, anyways, we had a screen. It was a little beach house, is what it was. So we were going to make this a family room. Now, I don't know how to do anything, really, tell you the truth. So after I start this, I start doing putting sheetrock up, okay? My friend came in to check the door and see how I was doing. I was just drinking a little bit, all right? So I'm cutting sheetrock with a skill saw, all right? Now, I don't know if you guys know how much dust there is. You never cut sheetrock with a skill saw. You use a knife and break it with your hands. I haven't learned that yet. And my friend came in to check the job up, and he's looking around, and there's so much dust you can't see anything, all right? Yeah, it looks good. I got the sheetrock on backwards, all right, all packed up there, And, I would get into these things, fixing a car. I don't know anything how to do, right? All right? And it was crazy. Anyway, so the thing that happened to me, I don't know about anybody's spiritual awakening in here, but mine scared me to death. Now, we all talk about the 1,000 forms of fear in our life and trauma. We have things we get help with. October 29th, 1978, my wife's birthday, my wife's brother was killed in a car crash. Jimmy was his name. And Jimmy was 19 years old. And Jimmy there was 3 kids. 2 out of the 3 got killed. He was drunk. Mommy and Daddy bought him new cars the year before that and the year before that. And he hit the jackpot. 2 days later, now the next day, my wife was in Florida. The next day, everybody was in Florida, and we were home with two baby little girls, Amy and Aaron, and I stayed home the next day I was sitting in my upholstery shop looking under alcohol. I couldn't spell alcohol. I didn't know how to spell it. I didn't know what AA was. I didn't know that I was an alcoholic. I was looking under alcohol because, one thing said to me, this whole thing that what we do about the books and sharing with each other is the problem is centers in our mind. It's in our thinking. And what happened to me, I knew that I was drinking and driving and a little baby girl and a bottle of beer between my legs. All right? I knew that. And I was scared to death that my number was up next. I don't know about anybody else. So I looked under there, and then the second day after, I ended up in a meeting like this. The guy's up here. He's talking, telling all this. He's in a suit. Everybody's laughing. By the way, they were all smoking meetings. You could never see across the room back then, Everybody smoking, laughing. If I had to say one word that I saw the first time I came in here was laughter. And here's one for you. What's the difference between the rich drunk and the poor one? The rich drunk has a canopy over the bed, and the poor one has a canopy under the bed. Okay? That's simple, right? Wet your pants. Guys was talking about you. Have you ever wet your pants? I couldn't believe the stories I heard here. All right? I really couldn't. That's what keeps me coming back. So anyways, I didn't get sober. I didn't believe this. I'm going to start that my life was unmanageable the day I was born until the day I got to AA. Unmanageable. And the first step is willing to listen is the dying to be. All right? And I heard a speaker say this. I could have used this. I could have used a coach of directions at 6 years old, instructor on life. And so I started to listen. All right? I started at 2 old elderly ladies. It's St. James Church, Mary Tutel and Betty Riley. I know they're up saints in heaven. They used to be so kind to me, all right? I mean, they were so precious, and they would take me over to the coffee pot and show me how much scoops to put in here. And they'd make me go buy bologna at the store and bread and make sure you get cookies. I never shopped for anything but in my life. And then I'd have to go over and ask this guy to speak, and I have to stay and clean up. This is a little work here. This is not what I signed up for. I want to get in and get out. So they were kind. I love the saints, and then I ended up joining Sacred Heart Church Groton speaker meeting in 1980, and it was a big speaker meeting in a cafeteria in Groton, Connecticut. And I ended up I had an old broken down van from the upholstery shop. And and I started driving, and I started to practice the 12 steps. God started to come into my life. The second step, came to believe power greater than myself. You can analyze this and study this as long as you want, but faith without works, as these guys found out in the beginning of their life, and started working, changed my mind, changed my center, my thinking, my thought path, and. A lot of stories that happened to me. I closed up that shop in 1980. I became a Mr. Mom. If you guys ever want instructions I'll share after with you. I got a lot of Mr. Mom stories, a lot of growing up. And you know what? God helped me grow up. He knew that I didn't have a childhood. He gave me a break. So I stayed home the first 5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a Mr. Mom. We had a son born in that year. We named him after that boy that died and their father, James Peter. And James Peter none of the kids have seen their father pick up a drink, one day at a time. It's God's grace and mercy that I'm here. And it's AA that has shown me the instructions, right here in the book. I never followed instructions. So I started to come to believe, and I know that second step is not mentioned too many times about one of the character defects. I always remember, no matter how long I'm sober, the outstanding character defect of me is defiancy of following the rules. I was mad at God, and that was all my life because of the lot that I was given. So I had to forgive myself. And there used to be a guy named Joe Ellis. God could forgive you if you can forgive yourself. Why can't you forgive yourself? So I started going to speaker meetings. I started to listen. I started to drive this van. And I started to become a husband and to my wife and a worker, okay? And I started, and I stayed home for 5 years. And then after 5 years, about 4 years sober, on my 4th anniversary, this little boy is 4 years old, and he came out of the, and we went to the grocery store, and he's in the back seat. Jamie, I said, look at that moon. I wonder who made that. He said, God. So I said, look at the stars. I wonder. He said, God. That's all he said. So the little boy's in the back seat, 4 years old. I'm 38. He says, hey, Dad. He says, if you don't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. That's a pretty powerful thing. I never heard the word I love you in my life. And so we started the journey, and at 5 or 6 years old, he had a horrible accident at 6, 7 years old. He broke his femur. I heard a speaker from California talking about the hardest thing of recovery is the fracture of a femur, because it takes the most time and the most love to be put back together. And I tell you, that was a year and a half, a spike cast like this, and 8 weeks, get into a regular cast, re-break the leg, crack it, go back in a cast, and we had no help except for Alcoholics Anonymous and God. So, but I do have to tell you a story. Just because you get sober, you don't become a genius. You don't become you get real smart. But all my friends started to help me out. My wife doesn't like my friends, by the way, in AA. They're all crazy like me, So my friend Lou says, hey, I got a friend of mine. He says, got a pool. He says, we'll put a pool up together. He says, all you have to do is buy the liner and the clay. That's all you got to buy. So 7 of us in AA put this pool together. And it was a beautiful, beautiful day. I'll never forget it. My son's downstairs in a cast. My wife and daughter, 2 kids, they're downstairs. And I'm in the back bedroom. And I'm looking at this pool. I mean, that pool was as blue as the ocean. It was gorgeous. And I don't know if anybody ever seen that what happens in the Bible when that guy raises his hand and all the water goes like that, and all the people run through the water, like that. And this pool went just like that. It all went all the way open, okay? And I'm telling you, it was 17,000 gallons of water, and about 7,000 went in the house. But the moral of that story, now this is sober, by the way. This is sober. I can't tell you all the sober things I've done crazy. Anyways, 3 days later, backyard looks like a B-52 bomb hit the shrapnel piled up as high as this roof, right? And my 9-year-old daughter Amy, she's now turning 50 this year. She's standing there next to me, and she goes, Daddy, this is terrible. Jamie broke his leg, and pool broke. How come these things happen? And it came right out of my mouth. I didn't even have to think. Daddy don't know how to put pools together. I didn't have to lie. You know how good that story is. The tree fell down. The rock root fell out. You can make up magic. Daddy didn't know how to put pools in. Anyways. They all still love me. Anyway, we got $3,000, $2,000 for a new pool, and it was there till the day we left. But anyways, as my life got along, my wife said, I was 40, 38, 39. My wife says, you better get a job. So I ended up at a step meeting. Bill Murphy, these people are not here, was a principal at school. We did steps on Wednesday night, 1, 2, 3, and then in the back room. And I said, God, I never get a job. So he said, well, as a janitor. I got a job as a janitor in Waterford High School for 5 years, and we finally had insurance and stuff. Anyways, a few years later, I have to say, and I know this is important down here, from the day I started Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been, there was a black and a white guy named Shep and Paul, and these 2 gentlemen took me to prisons and nut houses and all the, not me, we went into nut houses and prisons and all this stuff. And what happened is they showed me what happened. If you're not scared of alcohol, picking up a drink, do some service work and go into these places and see what delirium trembles and what happens to people's lives. It's horrible. And so I started going into hospitals and prisons, and I did a lot. First 10 years I was doing prison work. And so anyways, after that, my kids were getting up, and I started coaching baseball and basketball. And, one day they call me hippie. They think I'm a rock star. And hippie, I love you, hippie. So my grandkids, and I'm getting ahead of my story. I got to get my son's story. My son's story. I'm coaching baseball. I'm coaching baseball in the dugout, and this is my grandson, and down here, and he goes. I says, James, look at that boy up there. I says, his elbow's straight. He's not moving his head, and I look down at him, and he's looking at me in the eyes, and he goes, hippie. He says, your nose hair is growing real long out of your nose. That's Rule 62. Don't take yourself too serious. But anyways, back to Waterford High School, and anyways, this book and all of us are built on failures through tragedy and pain and suffering. And Father Eddie Dowling was Bill's sponsor, and it was through humiliation that we learned humility. I had not an ounce of humility. I didn't know any of that. So anyways, one guy came up with another idea. All these ideas you get. We were at a meeting, and three of us said, he said, you want to become a CO? So I thought it meant CEO. Those are nice jobs. They are, right? They pay a lot of money. So yeah. So three of us took a test for CO, and that means a correctional officer. All right? And if you don't think God has a sense of humor, you hear this is crazy, So three of us took the test, 2 passed, and 1 failed. And you're looking at the guy who failed, all right? The other 2 guys never wanted the job. I never saw them in another AA meeting in my entire life. I don't know what happened. I took the job because I needed it and I wanted it for my family. I had no insurance, no retirement. I was 43 years old. And I had been sober for 10 or 12 years or something like this, and I'd been doing prisons, and people in AA probably helped me get over the hump to get it. God has a sense of humor, right? So what does he do? I got a job in a woman's prison, 20 years, all right? And I got to back up one story. Time goes by so fast. I got to back up and tell this one story before I get into the prison story. I'll tell these 2 the same thing. This Sacred Heart job that I was driving and doing all this service driving, and we were going to meetings and speaking in all these places and growing up. One day, I was driving to Rhode Island. We went to a lot of Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut meetings, all around that area. Speaker meetings all over the place. And one day, I was driving the van. In the back seat of the van was a guy. He goes to me. He says, hey, Fred. He says, do you remember Bill Akins? I said, yeah, Bill Akins. I said, yeah. I said, he 12-stepped me, him and Al, in 1979. I said, he was killed by a drunk driver. So he said, yeah. He says, I was that guy. So he had served about 15 years in jail and got out and was in the back seat of the van trying to make amends to his brothers in steps 7, 8, and 9, And I like those things. And I don't have a lot of time to talk about the prison experience. I could write a book in a library about that. But God put me in there for a reason. I was an altar boy in that prison with that priest. My mother was there before. Back in those days, you went to jail if you were cheating on you got pregnant with another guy and all that stuff. And I ended up as a correctional officer there. So that one story I like to tell, and it's a God story, an AA story, is my wife and I were down in Stuart, Florida about 8 years ago. And it was a rainy day, and what do you call it? It was a rainy day, and I said, Wayne, I saw, how you can tell AA meeting, right? People are smoking outside, bumper stickers on the cars. So I said, Wayne, the meeting. So I went into the meeting. It was 12 noon, so it was on the 3rd step. And so I went into the meeting, and I came out of the meeting, and this young girl chased me out. Excuse me, hey. So I said, what? She says, have you ever lived in Connecticut? So I said, well, I used to live in Connecticut. I live in North Carolina now. She said, were you ever a prison guard in a woman's prison? So I said, yeah, I used to work. She said, you were one of the kind men, nice men that treated us women well. She said, I was in there for alcohol and drugs. She said, I got out. She said, I moved to Florida, and she's running a woman's halfway house down in Florida. And, we hugged each other, looked up at the sky and said, I think it's God telling you to keep doing what you're doing, that's all. Don't make high mass out of it. Keep it simple. That's what our forefathers taught. We're going to get buried like other people. We're going to die like other people. We're going to have things happen to us that are blessings. And so anyways, to make a long story short, I ended up coaching baseball. I ended up, my kid was, all of my son's friends didn't have fathers. They lived in my house, and most of them, and they ended up winning basketball championship. The last 2 years in high school, and my son was a captain. He helped all these boys. I mean, it was phenomenal. It was a great life. My girls, they did softball champion and cheerleading stuff, and it was wonderful. I can't pay back. It was wonderful. That's all I could say. So, anyways, I'm going to start. Anyways, moving on. I finished my tour in that my end of sentence in 2010, and Maureen knew she was going to move down. All three of our kids ended up down here. 2 went to small colleges down here, and they started having families, and they gave us 6 grandkids. And that's when I became a hippie and a real rock star. Man, I tell you, grandkids are great. I'm telling you, they're the best. You can take them to Dunkin' Donuts, you can do all kinds of, spoil them rotten. You feel good, man. You have more time and love with them and stuff. Regular kids they're hard. They're hard. Anyways, so, a lot of stories. I taught my grandson basketball a little bit, playing basketball. He was 5 years old, all right? And one day, there was 3 baskets scored. He scored one of them, all right? And so, Jackson, he's now 6'4". He's going to be a senior in college down here. So he's right in the back seat with his sister. We're going to McDonald's because got to go to McDonald's after that. He scored a basket. So, anyways, this voice in the back seat says, "Hey, hippie." I said, "What?" He says, "You know why I play basketball?" I said, "No." He says, "Because you taught me, hippie, and I want to thank you very much." Man, it doesn't get any better than that. I couldn't be grateful from the day for a long, long time. Gratitude is an attitude, all right? It's unselfish giving, an unmerited gift, sacrifice, time, energy. It costs a lot. But it costs a lot for our drinking. Everybody that sits in here knows what drinking costs us. Car crashes, divorces, deaths, all kinds of crazy things. So anyways, the kids just started growing up and stuff like that, and I had a lot of great. I went to all the ball games and things down here and stuff like this, and now they're all grown up. The youngest one is 16 years old, little girl, Ainsley, and the boys. I went to football games, and they were grown up. So we live in Cary down here, and we've been down here for 15 years. I have a home group. It's called the Living Now Group in the Triangle L&O Club down there, and I love that group. If you find a group, grow up. It's one of the most important, precious thing in the thing. The Sacred Heart group let me just do my thing and drive, and then I kept learning. But when I came down here, as we all know, God works through all of us. This Living Now group, there was a lot of old timers always sitting in the back row right up here. Most of them couldn't hear. But they were up there. They threw their $1, $2 in the basket. So I joined this group, and I saw God working in there. I saw people coming in and getting sober and getting their families, getting their jobs, and I understood how this thing worked through the example of people, the instrument in the books. I saw it all. I saw it, and I still see it today, and I feel it. So I think that knowing where to go, no matter how hard life is, and having a home group and support system. Sponsorship is a terrific thing, but your sponsor can't do it all for you, all right? And you've got to have a little faith that works, okay? So I got down here and I started doing that. I started doing the group, and I do the lunch, I do the noon meetings, the Tuesday, Wednesday, and we started Big Book on Sunday. Our group is responsible for 11 meetings a week, 44 meetings a month. And there's not a lot of help in service work. There's not, I can tell you. But I love it. It gives me something to do, all right? And I know AA could live without me, all right, without us, but I can't live without AA. That's the bottom line of this thing. So anyways, my wife and I have been blessed. We've gone to Hawaii a few times and stuff like this, and I've been at meetings over there. And my son he's got a little beach house down in Ocean Isle down there. We go down there and stuff like this. So it really truly is a blessing. My birthday was just the other day, last week, and I'm not going to ask you to guess how old I am, but I'll tell you I'm 79 years old. I get up in the morning and I pray every day. I do my stretches and roll up. Ainsley taught me how to do that one time when she was a little girl, She says, Hippie, let me show you. So we get on the floor one day, and she shows me these roll-ups and all this. I've been doing it for like 7 years now. All right? And I feel good. Little girl. Anybody can teach us something if we're willing to learn. If I had to pick the most popular, they're all good, the step that I love the most, that has helped me the most in my life, is made a decision to turn my will and life over to a power to God. I could not make a decision in my life. I was unconstitutionally incapable of being honest, which is the first principle and the first step. I had no help from anybody. But when I learned how to make that decision, a broken down cuckoo clock is right twice a day. All right? I wasn't right once. And by the way, did I tell you? I know how I'm leaving this earth. I know what's going to happen to me. I know. I'm going to be in the hospital with the oxygen up here, strapped up with all ropes and wires and all this other stuff. And one of my grandkids is going to come in and he's going to pull the plug. And he says, I want to charge his cell phone up. I got to tell you, I travel with, if I could tell you the people that sickest, happiest people that made me laugh. I used to go out on meetings and I used to come home with the van. And I mean, honest to God, I would try to remember all those things. Funny things. And Miss Lady Rita, it was just funny. It was good. You can learn a lot by laughter, And Yogi Berra is one of my heroes. You can learn a lot by watching, okay? And, this guy, this 90 years that we have been given the grace to expel the obsession of alcohol from us with the simple prayers of the 12 steps, okay? I know that this priest, the Jewish guy, and my mother and father, I don't talk much about them. They died of alcoholism. My mother at 56 years old. I was the oldest of 4 children, and they didn't do any better with the other 3. I have a relationship with my youngest one, Maureen, who's the same name. Talk about coincidences. I met her, that's a long story. I met her, and she is the same name as my wife. And then she also married a correctional officer who was a drug addict and an alcoholic. She had a divorce. But she's down here in Mooresville, and she moved out, and she's got a great life. We see each other often. But we have a great relationship. But that's God. That's God. It's not me. All right? He puts the things down. But back to that decision, that I made a decision to turn my will. And I think being the alcoholic with a chronic mental illness, that I was privileged to be able to do God's work. That's all it is. I have a guy that just passed away, 97 years old. His name is Bill Swan from upstate New Hampshire. And I drove him 12 years to AA meetings. All right? And Bill used to say, if you're honest and you live in reality, your life will be the most beautiful thing you could ever imagine. And I had another guy named John Cobb. John Cobb, Father Martin was his sponsor, and he told him to shut up. You don't know nothing. All right? But John Cobb, I drove him for 10 years and picked him up. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to do a lot of this stuff. I'll be honest with you. But I'm glad I did it, because that's why I'm still here. But this John Cobb, he was a really smart guy. He got a DUI leaving an AA meeting. How do you do that? He was drunk when he came in, drunk when he left. And then I had this lady, Ellen Cummings. I got to wrap up, 5 off? How many minutes?
2.
2? Good. Okay, forget that story. Here's the story. I want to just say a couple of prayers. One of them is, thank you, God, for what you've given me. Thank you for what you've taken from me. And thank you for what you've left me. I sought my soul and I couldn't see. I saw God, he eluded me. but I sought my brothers and sisters, and I found all three. May the road rise with you. May the sun shine upon your hand, May the road rise with you. May the sun shine upon your face. May the rain fall upon the grass, and the wind blow at your back. Until we meet, may God hold all of us in the palm of his hand, one day at a time. And thank you for having me. I love you guys. Thank you.